10 years ago today, I posted my very first upload to the MathWiz97X YouTube channel. Isn't that crazy? Before getting into this video, I wanted to give a quick update on my plans for Behind the Universe going forward. I do intend to continue both what could have happened, as well as pretend it never happened, and I might even wrap up Raw vs. SmackDown if people are still interested in that format. Obviously, things are going to be a bit different now that I'm years removed from most of these ideas, but I feel like this gives me a chance to reach some sort of closure with that chapter of my life, in place of the finale that I would have wanted. So here's the deal. This episode will cover all the remaining entries I had written down before my hiatus 3 years ago. Some will be in more detail than others based on whatever notes I left myself. After that, future What Could Have Happened installments will cover storylines that should have or might have taken place in material that never got made. I'm excited to put these stories out there. Thank you so much for your continued support. Now, let's resume our coverage of things that could have happened in Universe Mode. WWE 2K17 saw the surprise return of Cody Rhodes, who had previously been acting under the Stardust character. But as Cody revealed himself to the world, Stardust was standing in the ring. Eventually, this imposter Stardust was revealed to be Austin Aries, and the two superstars continued their battle for the Intercontinental title up through WrestleMania, where Cody would finally capture his first championship. He would then defend the title at Extreme Rules in a Hell in a Cell triple threat match before moving on to a program with The Miz. However, initial plans for Stardust could have taken the angle in a few different directions. In WWE 2K16, for example, Stardust wasn't introduced with the intent of being anyone other than Cody. When Stardust won the Intercontinental title at Survivor Series, that was, in my mind, still Cody Rhodes. It wasn't until I began setting up the Royal Rumble match that the twist came to mind. And so retroactively I decided that the Survivor Series win belonged to Austin Aries. Part 2 of the potential Stardust plans would have taken place after the Extreme Rules bout, where Ty Dillinger could have debuted as yet another imposter. He then would have allied himself with Austin Aries as two guys who had been ignored by the WWE for so long. Dillinger having spent 10 years in developmental, Aries through his time on the Indies. Looks definitely factored in as well, as I felt that both men could have reasonably portrayed Stardust without it being too much of a stretch. Dillinger's arrival would have then set up a Chris Jericho face turn to fight alongside Cody Rhodes. Y2J would take care of Aries, the American Nightmare would take care of Dillinger, but at Payback, it would be Dillinger walking out of a fatal four-way match with the IC title. Cody Rhodes would get a rematch at the following Battleground event, going so far as to put his career on the line, but ultimately, he would fall short and be forced to leave the company. This is one of those scrapped ideas that actually has quite a bit of thought put into it. The concept came out of a conversation with former Friday Night Nexus creator Heel Diggy, and it might have been that second opinion that made all the difference. Looking back, I really can't remember why I decided to go in a different direction than this. Maybe I thought the Stardust angle would have gone stale had I continued it. Maybe I was more invested in giving The Miz renewed focus. Regardless, it didn't happen. And now it'll go down as one of two potential Ty Dillinger debuts that didn't happen. The other scrap Ty Dillinger debut is much simpler. Instead of facing Tyler Breeze in the Gorgeous Open Invitational, that match would have taken place as part of the Intercontinental Championship ladder match qualifiers heading into WrestleMania. Breeze would have injured him after the loss, taken his spot in the ladder match, and set up a rematch later down the road. I'm pretty sure the injury angle got passed off to Apollo Crews instead, and Dillinger ended up debuting against Breeze at a later date anyway. Not much to say here beyond some slight alterations to what actually took place. For more on Apollo Crews, I considered having him return shortly after his injury to, shockingly, join forces with Tyler Breeze as part of a rivalry with Ty Dillinger. Crews would have given Breeze a numbers advantage over Dillinger, acting as an insurance policy to protect Prince Pretty's good looks. I don't know what his motive for aligning with Breeze would have been, but my goal with this was to bring in TJ Perkins to aid Dillinger in a similar way to how Jericho would have helped Cody. I guess I had a phase where I really wanted to put Dillinger in a rivalry that built to a Fatal 4-Way match to crown either a new Intercontinental Champion or a #1 contender for the title. The belt would have stayed on Cody in this one, though. Next up are a few scrapped faction ideas, starting with the return of Adam Rose as a member of the Outcasts. I have an attire saved for this one, but there didn't seem to be any deep planning beyond the obvious parallel to the real-life Social Outcasts group that served as a basis for my version. My assumption is that Adam Rose would have returned as part of Fandango's search for the next party animal, only to turn on his former partner and align with Curtis Axel. It might have worked as a cheap pop calling back to a moment in Universe Mode history, but it doesn't seem like a decision with longevity in mind. I struggle to add new credible members to the faction as is, with Jack Swagger, Neville, and Sin Cara all falling short of their potential. Adam Rose would have been just another name on that list. On top of that, I just don't think he'd make a good main eventer. I know I say that having booked Curtis Axel in main event spots before, but at least I took the time to invest in his character long term. For Adam Rose to so suddenly jump from comedy relief to uppercard heel, yeah, I just don't see it. And if I don't believe in it, then it wouldn't have ended well. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have Braun Strowman, the party animal. After his exile from the Wyatt family, I could have taken Braun Strowman's character in two directions. One option, the option I took, was to turn that betrayal into rage and make Braun Strowman a monster. The other option was to portray the exile in a more sympathetic light, maybe even a heartwarmingly comedic light, which brings me back to Fandango. You see, Fandango knew what it was like to be left by a friend as well, so if anyone could be there to support a lonely giant, it was him. Thanks to the WWE Draft, Braun Strowman would have found himself on Monday Night Raw, and after watching him suffer a few losses, Fandango would have approached the big man to show him the power of friendship. From there, the angle could have gone anywhere. This new incarnation of the party animals could remain humorous jobbers, recruit new members, pursue the tag team titles, who knows. It's a fun idea in theory, but in the end, I decided to take both the Braun Strowman character and the Party Animals storyline to other places. Strowman stayed on SmackDown, and Fandango remained a goofy solo act for a few more months. Before we move on from Strowman though, let's talk about a completely new stable that never saw the light of day. Strongman Simon Gotch and the Englishmen. This team would have been a rebranding of sorts for the Vaudevillains with the addition of Braun Strowman. My idea was to theme the faction around the age of wrestling when people were competing in carnivals and kayfabe was in full effect, with heavy emphasis on a classic catch-as-catch-can grappling style. Gotch and Strowman were the wrestlers, Aiden English was their manager. This one was decimated by roster cuts before it ever got off the ground, but even if it did, I'm not confident enough in my old school wrestling knowledge to think I'd have executed it well. Most likely, it would have just gotten phased out over time, but it's fun to imagine what the gimmick could have looked like. I left a little teaser at the end of the last What Could Have Happened video, and now, 3 years later, I have to deliver on that. As we all know, Cesaro defended his World Heavyweight Championship against AJ Styles at Payback before Luke Gallows and Carl Anderson came down to break up the match. From there, Samoa Joe made a statement by laying out both the champion and the challenger, thus calling his shot at the gold. But did you know that Samoa Joe wasn't the original man considered to take that spot? With Finn Balor locked in a feud with Randy Orton, and AJ Styles the man positioned to fall, there was only one other pro wrestler at the time who could call himself leader of the Bullet Club, the Cleaner, Kenny Omega. Not only would Omega have jumped right into the main event scene on Raw, but the plan was to go one step further and have him win the world title at Battleground from Cesaro. This would have been a big move that I'm sure some of my audience would have liked, but much like my decision to have The Undertaker join The Shield or Ronda Rousey debut to fight Brock Lesnar, it would have been one made primarily with shock value in mind, rather than any long-term plans. In hindsight, now that I've seen Omega's work and have context for the character beyond the Bullet Club, I could see myself laying out a few decent storylines to carry him through an extended title reign. At the time, however, I knew very little about Kenny Omega, and that's just a recipe for disaster. Immediately turning an outsider into the top dog would have pushed every other potential challenger and every other developing storyline down the card, which isn't the result I would have wanted. Bringing a previously established character like Samoa Joe to the forefront gives the moment more impact, not only because people already know who Joe is, but because there's a future for him after the world title, based on the rivalries I spent months building up. What would I have done with Kenny Omega after he lost the belt? Nothing. I would have gotten tired of updating the created wrestler across games. It would have been a one and done deal, which cheapens the long-term impact of that initial shocking moment. With AEW on the air, it's fun to think about how I might book Kenny Omega against some of these talents nowadays, but in 2017, I was better off sticking to what I knew. The last entry in today's episode involves one of several potential ideas I had for ending the legendary WWE title reign of Kevin Owens. The man I considered for this role was another long-established villain in the world of Universe Mode, Bray Wyatt. Moving the title from one top heel to another as a conclusion to such a dominant run would have been hard to pull off well, but it falls in line with the kinds of twists I would use back then to keep viewers guessing. This feud would have started off as an alliance between the two men at Cyber Sunday in a tag team match against a returning Undertaker and his brother Kane. Having been beaten at WrestleMania by the champ and later attacked by Bray Wyatt, the Dead Man had a score to settle with both men. The Brothers of Destruction would ultimately fall short in this encounter, however, as Kane would take the pinfall and be removed from the equation. While this bout would initially be used to set up a grudge match between Bray Wyatt and The Undertaker at SummerSlam, where a weakened Dead Man would meet his end at the hands of the Eater of Worlds, the unique union of Wyatt and Owens would also plant the seeds for their future showdown. A few months later, after KO would barely outlast Adam Cole in a grueling series of matches, the lights would black out before revealing Bray Wyatt standing face-to-face with SmackDown's top prize fighter. Then, at the next month's Survivor Series, Wyatt would successfully capture his first Universe Mode title, putting an end to the unstoppable Kevin Owens. I even laid out spots in the match. Wyatt kicks out of the pop-up powerbomb, Owens survives a Sister Abigail, Wyatt blocks a package piledriver and hits Sting's Scorpion Death Drop, a callback to Wyatt's past with the Icon, but Owens still kicks out. Wyatt goes for the Undertaker's Tombstone piledriver, but Owens reverses into a tombstone of his own and forces Bray Wyatt to dig deep into the reserves for a kickout. Then the Wyatt family gets involved to take out Owens. But before Bray can capitalize, Dean Ambrose hits the ring and levels the playing field. It's utter chaos in the main event. But amidst everything, Bray Wyatt sees his chance to put Owens away. Following the match, the Wyatt family would mysteriously abduct Owens, just like Dean Ambrose a few months prior. Weeks would pass, with no sign of the former champ, until shortly before the Royal Rumble, when Owens would return to the Blue Brand with an unconscious Eric Rowan at his feet. The Wyatts couldn't corrupt a soul that was already corrupted. The championship rematch would take place at the Royal Rumble in a 3 Stages of Hell match, but Owens would once again fall just short of victory. My plan from there was to have Dean Ambrose win the Royal Rumble and go on to win the belt from Wyatt at WrestleMania. But with Ambrose's character heading down a darker path of his own, that would have passed the title between 3 heels with no foreseeable face to topple Ambrose anytime soon. Ultimately, the rivalry was scrapped in order to keep Wyatt centered around Ambrose's gradual heel turn. After all, Wyatt's primary motivation going forward was to destroy the members of the Shield piece by piece. So throwing him into a program with Kevin Owens would have derailed that story. On top of that, I felt like Wyatt was one of those talents who didn't need a championship to stay relevant. As for Kevin Owens, his dominant reign as champion needed to be used to elevate a top babyface more than anything. It's a more standard story than the Wyatt feud would have been, but sometimes it's better to stick to conventions than to make a mess out of shocking the audience. At this stage, I'm already getting into uncharted territory in the Universe Mode timeline, so I'll save the discussion on where my plans actually were supposed to end up for another video. There's going to be a lot of ground to cover when we get there, and I hope you'll join me for the ride. I say it at the end of all of these, but this time in particular, I wanted to give an extra special thank you to everyone who watched this video. A lot can happen in 3 years, so the fact that anyone at all stuck around to support this small and active YouTube channel means the world to me. Likewise, I know there are people out there who somehow stumbled across my backlog while I wasn't uploading. So if this happens to be the first Behind the Universe popping up in your sub box or recommended videos, welcome. BTU has always felt like a very math whiz project, and going back to older episodes played a big part in why I came back to this channel at all. So in case you're worried that I might lose my smile again, trust me when I say I want there to be new math whiz videos more than anyone. And there will be. So until next time, and f*** it, I'll bring this back. Keep on YouTubing. But what does it mean though? It's like keep on keeping on, you know? But like with YouTube. Oh, that's kinda silly.